Everybody, welcome to class, guys. How are y'all doing? Hope everybody's having a wonderful Sunday. It is August 9th, Sunday. I'm in the Merrimack County of New Hampshire. And guys, we are going to be getting into politics, an understanding of what it is and how it affects uh, our everyday life. Last week, I started this little segment. I started it last week to help educate people on what is happening in politics and to help us all come to a consensus of what is happening with American politics. So today we're going to be looking at, I guess, chapter 2 of this installment, and it's called The Separation of Powers. Okay? Very important episode. Okay? This determines when tyrannical government is essentially in play. So, guys, we're going to get right into it. We're not wasting any time because I'd like these little sessions of learning to be about 7 to 8 minutes long. Or, sorry, not 7 to 8 minutes, but we'll say 8 to 15 minutes long. Okay. And that if there's a video that is included in it, then we'll add that video in. But otherwise, I'm just going to be looking at what these things actually are, and we'll break it down as we go along. So, like I said, today we're looking at the separation of powers. So, in the Federalist, number 47, in the courthouse of justifying the basic structure of the newly proposed Constitution to his readers, James Madison made an extraordinary pronouncement. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Okay? So when we get all powers accumulating under one person, the or if there's just a few people making these calls, but they're all doing the exact same thing, could be many people, or guys, hereditary. We are not in a hierarchy. We are in a democracy, which means that allows the people to have a voice. Okay? Remember five the five characteristics in politics in America. So, the freedom of American people, he suggested, depends on how their leaders are chosen, than whether the different powers of government are divided among the people. Political legitimacy may very well Political legitimacy may well require representation, but the defense of liberty requires above all that there be more than one answer to the fundamental political question: who rules? All right. And in our case, we have the president, the uh, Congress, and then the Supreme Court. Those three, the triangle. And they're supposed to check and balance one another. This means, by which the Constitution addresses this need has come to be known as the separation of powers. The legislative and executive and judiciary powers compose separate branches of the national government described in separate articles in the Constitution. But this is no simple separation. In fact, the very complexity of the ever evolving relations among the three branches of the national government has been an essential feature of both the structure and logic of American system and remains crucial to its capacity to secure liberties for of citizens. That is key. Okay, these guys are supposed to be doing things on our behalf, not on their wallet's behalf or on some company's behalf. But key word is of citizens. Okay, that would be people, not corporations. The notion that there are because sorry, let's start that again. The notion that there are three basic modes of governmental action has deep roots in the political tradition of the West. In his Politics, written in the 4th century BC, Aristotle identified lawmaking, the execution of the law, and the edu- education of the deputies about its implications as the three core functions of the government. But he did not insist that they be separated because of freedom of the citizens. He did not insist that they be separated because of the freedom of the citizens was his not his primary concern. Okay? That emphasis on liberty reached the framers of the Constitution through the classical liberal thinkers. They embedded, perhaps most prominently, Montesquieu, who, in his Spirits of the Laws, published in 1748, made an assertion made an assertion much like Madison's. When the powers of government are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, Montesquieu wrote, then there can be no liberty. Boom. There it is. So, separation of powers is extremely important, guys. All right, we're going to just keep pushing on because we're already halfway to that point where I want to end. So, in abstract, the case for this kind of separation as a vital safeguard of freedoms is straightforward. If the people who make the law also decide how to enforce it, then then resolve disputes about whether it was properly applied, then the will of those individuals and not the authority of the law that governs the society. Okay? So they cannot all individually make their own choices, or they cannot individually say, uh, here, let's read it again, because in the case for this kind of separation as vital safeguard of freedom is straightforward. If the people who make the law also decide how to enforce it and then resolve disputes about whether they're properly applied, then the will of those individuals and not the authority of the law that governs the society. Okay? They can't do all of it together. They have to be able to abstractly look at each other and be like, this is breaking the law or this is not breaking the law. Even if all those powerful magistrates are elected and genuinely represent the majority, there is no recourse when they act abusively or tyrannically. Concentrated power is inherently unaccountable. Okay, we see a lot of that characteristic right now in America. The case for avoiding such concentration, moreover, is not only a matter of protecting liberty, but also of recognizing the distinct characters of the different powers of government and embodying them in different kinds of institutions. It is vital to see that in this conception of politics advanced by our Constitution, there is not just one fungible commodity called power, which the different branches of our government divide among themselves. The different functions of government make for different modes of operation that are best expressed in different institutional forms. My mouse does not like to work, chat, sometimes. The legislator the legislator frames and authorizes government action. It makes the law that channel public power and allocate public resources. In a complex society like ours, this kind of framing work is in sorry, in a complex society like ours, this kind of framing work is necessarily the product of accommodation and compromise between different views and factions, and the work of Congress is therefore necessarily plural. It is a work of many and involves conciliation among them. See what I'm saying? You got to work amongst each other to make this happen, you know? One guy cannot be like, I'm making this decision, and these two groups do not have the ability to have a say on whether we're doing it. That can't happen. The executive, meanwhile, generally acts within structure established by laws that the legislator frames. The purpose of the office is action in the world, and the institutional design reflects that. The president applies the sort of power given to him by Congress, and in some limited cases, directly by the Constitution, to particular circumstances our society confronts and wields in the moment to structure the nation situation. But to structure and carry out its laws. Sorry, guys. Sometimes my eyes shift. My glasses aren't the best. I need new ones. All right. He reacts to events, adjusts to pressures, and makes concrete choices among permissible options in complicated situations. Actions that actions like that is also almost necessarily singular endeavor, not a group activity. As to be carried off well, it requires energy, boldness, steadiness, focus, and ambition. The judiciary then steps in after laws have been framed and actions have been taken, and reviews them in response to cases and complaints to make sure the general rules have been applied appropriately in particular circumstances. It neither makes law nor acts to execute them, but assesses the behavior of others. All right. So, Supreme Court, judiciary, they take a look at the laws and make sure that it does not contradict what the framers have put in place on the Constitution. And they are the check on the House or the Congress, all right? It's only a slight exaggeration to say that Congress is expected to frame for the future, and the president is expected to act in the present, and the courts are expected to assess the past. Boom, there it is. And the branches are also and the branches also represent different modes of legitimacy. The House of Representatives and the especially since the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913, the Senate are directly elected by the people, and their internal plurality makes them capable of representing the diversity of our society. The president is more indirectly elected, and unitarily office his unitarily office puts his unitary office puts his own character in front and center. The courts are appointed and kept shielded from the shifting winds of public opinion, in the hope of elevating learned judgment over popularity over popularity, including these different answers to the question of who rules within one system while keeping them separate allows our Constitution to benefit from all in different circumstances and from the tensions between them. That means there's always going to be push and pull between them, but in that way, not one person, one individual will have all of the power. It was designed on purpose that way. But these internal tensions actually mean that the separation of powers can never be complete. Despite his bold assertion about the necessity of separation, Madison acknowledged that some critics of the Constitution thought the document failed to separate the branches sufficiently. One of the principal objections incalculated by the more respectable adversaries of the Constitution, he wrote, is it's supposed to it is supposed violation of the political maxim that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments ought to be separate and distinct. These critics had a point. While the Constitution does create three distinct branches of government to house the three distinct functions of the government, it also intertwines those branches and involves them in one other's work. The presidential appointments and treaties require the approval of the Senate, for instance, and all executive and judicial officers can be impeached and removed by Congress. The president can veto legislation and propose specific measures to Congress. Judges are appointed by the executive if the Senate approves and can halt or reverse some kinds of legislative and executive actions. The everyday work of the branches draw them consistently into one other's business. Always having to push and pull, guys. Always. We're almost done here. Okay? We went a little bit longer. It's okay though. But there's a reason for that intertwining. It happens in part because the distinctions between the kind of powers the branches exercise is not itself perfectly clean. Experience in it has instructed us not Experience has instructed us that no skill in the science of government has yet been able to discriminate or define with sufficient certainty. Its three great provinces, the legislative, executive, and judiciary, Madison argued in Federalist number 37, but more importantly, as he noted in the Federalist number 48, to achieve the primary purpose of the separation of these branches, which is the prevention of abuse of power and the defense of the liberties of the citizens. It is actually necessary to intermix the branches a little at the margins, unless these departments be so far connected and blended as to give each of a constitutional control over the others. The degree of separation of which the maximum requires as essential to a free government can never in practice be duly maintained. There is a little bit of overlap, guys. That triangle is not a perfect triangle. There is a tiny overlap that gives them a little bit of leeway to pull, and make these decisions. To work in a way, however, this mixing of authorities must be only marginal, exactly like I just said, rather than give each branch a real share of the kind of work that the others do. It gives each branch some modest means to restrain the others in their own domains as a defensive measure. This is intended ultimately to preserve the separation between the branches and insisted on the differences between them, as Madison put in the Federalist 51. The great security against the gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. The provision for defense must in this as in all other cases be made commiserate commensurate to the danger of attack. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Yeah, so you got to be ambitious on all ends, okay? So let's say the president is like, we'll say, for instance, I'm going to deport a bunch of people from this country, even though the 14th Amendment gives birthright citizenship to those individuals. The Supreme Court is supposed to come in and be like, well, you're not applying the law properly. So unfortunately, no, that's getting overturned. And then what the president is supposed to do is he's supposed to have them try to write a law to pass to make something like that happen. But once again, that goes against the Constitution. So the Supreme Court can then pull once again and be like, no, that's not happening. That's why, one can't truly override one another, but the laws can be written. Remember, this is all around the Constitution, guys. Constitution is the core of everything. Can't override or supersede it, but you can write amendments to the Constitution. In this sense, the separation of powers is the foremost example of the premise embodied by the entire constitutional framework that the system of government is not a machine but an arrangement of people. Its work must be its work must consist of human interaction and must be dynamic and durable, which means it has to somehow exist in a constant tension with itself. The separation of powers is therefore best understood as not as an architectural element of our system, but as a dynamic feature of it. And this is also how it protects the liberty of the citizen. Liberty is not a condition, but the way of life. It can also be sustained by constant action. In the very precarity of the separation of powers, the fact that it is a source of constant tension and strife, of endless lawsuits, threats, and bargains, is precisely how it keeps our system limber. That is that this system is always threatening to fall over is how it keeps us always focused on maintaining its balance. That has evolved with circumstances is how it's remained connected to its original purpose. Yeah, I'll be honest with y'all. That balance is terrible. We should just get stable ass ground. I'll be honest. But as far as like having the three branches of power and separation of power, it makes sense for our government. So it's something that we got to do. And we should abide by it because the Constitution is extremely important. The tense and endless combat between the branches facilitates the everyday work of the constitutionalism. Without it, our government could neither meet our society's needs nor secure the people's freedom. I'm going to say that part again. I'm going to say the first part again. I'm going to read that entire part again. The tense and endless combat between the branches facilitates the everyday work of constitutionalism. Without it, our government would without it, our government could neither meet our society's needs nor secure the people's freedom. The absence of a functional, complex, always shifting separation of powers could justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. All right, this is by Dr. Yuval Levin, is Beth and Ravenel Curry Chair and the Public Policy Director of Social, Cultural, and Constitutional Studies, American Enterprise Institution. All right, guys. So I wanted to go over this. It took about a half hour to get through this. I mean, I'm gonna have to change, I guess, the time frame that it takes for me to run through everything. But guys, like like I said, there's a lot packed into that. There's a lot of information, but that is a good base and start so you can fully understand what's happening in our government. Because when you look at it and then you take what's happening with the Constitution and you apply everything that we were looking at right here, things aren't making sense. Okay. So we have a separation of power for a reason. We have the Constitution for a reason. And right now, both of those things are being ignored. All right. Guys, I'm going to be ending this portion. Actually, I'm going to end the stream here. We're only doing a short one today. I will be back on tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Eastern. All right. So if you don't already, make sure you hit that follow button and turn on those notifications. That way you'll know when I'm on. I'm only doing these tea shouts once a week. Tomorrow I'll be gaming. All right. If you'd like to help support the stream, you can do so by subscribing. All right. If you have Amazon Prime, you can upgrade that to a Twitch Prime for free and sub for free. You only get one of those a month. All right. Otherwise, it's $5.99 to sub up, or you can be gifted subs through somebody in the community. There's also Twitch Turbo, $10.99 a month, lets you watch any stream without ads. Guys, I will see you tomorrow. I love y'all. Peace.